Actually.
Okay. We can start, huh? Yes. Well, I start by introducing myself. I am Igor de Rachewiltz. I was born and brought up in Italy, but I spent much of my life in Australia, where I came to study and to gain my doctorate at the Australian National University. And I spent most of my adult life, in fact, working at the Australian National University. And I retired about 10 years ago, but I am still associated with my division as a visiting fellow. And I have plenty of time in this way to carry on my research, to publish articles and books. From a very early stage in my life, still as a young man in Italy, I have been interested in medieval history and philology, and especially in the context between East and West and the influence that Asian history had on European history. And I became also interested in Oriental languages, in Chinese, and subsequently in Mongolian, when my attention became focused on the Mongol period, which is so important not only for the history of Mongolia and of Asia, but also for the history of Europe. So I began studying Mongolian history. I became interested in Genghis Khan and in the Mongol dynasty of China and Iran, and I became interested in Mongolian language and literature. This is how it all started in the late 1940s. Then I came to Australia and I wrote my dissertation on Sino-Mongol culture contexts in the 13th century. And it was about that time that my attention became really centered on the secret history of the Mongols, which is our main native source on Genghis Khan. So at that time, there was a Russian translation of the secret history, there was a German translation of the secret history, but there was no English translation of the full text, Mongol text of the secret history. There was Professor Cleves at Harvard who was working on it, but nobody knew when his translation would be published. Furthermore, his translation from samples that were quoted in his articles was written in a very old-fashioned English, a bit like the Bible English. Therefore, the thing that came to my mind immediately, and which was encouraged by Professor Nicholas Poppe in the United States, was to prepare a readable English translation of this very important work. And I have been working on the secret history in this way for about 40 years. First, I had to prepare an index of all the words. Then I had to study many articles and books written by Mongol, Japanese, Chinese, Russian, European and American scholars, and gradually acquire enough knowledge to be able to tackle the secret history myself. And this I did in a tentative way by producing a provisional translation, which was published in the journal of my department at the university. It was a series of articles in the Journal of Far Eastern History, and it was a kind of homemade production. There were many mistakes, but there were footnotes, endnotes, and Professor Pope helped me by reading all these chapters, and I produced a complete translation of the secret history over a period of about 10 years. And then realized when I finished it that I had to do all this work again, because the first chapters were not really very good. The only good thing about this work was that it was in very simple, in very readable English. And many people wrote to me saying, oh, finally we can appreciate this wonderful literary work. You should publish a new edition in book form. Now, I thought that would be a good idea too, but it would meant working for another 10, perhaps 15 years on it. On the other hand, I was really in love with the secret history. And people asked me, why are you so involved with this work? So I think for 3 reasons, mainly. One is that it's the best source on the life of Genghis Khan. And it's written by the Mongols themselves, by people who knew Genghis Khan, who lived and worked and fought with him. So it's written with an intimate knowledge of the man. At the same time, it's also a work of literature, of epic literature, not only history, but also poetry, because these stories were recited by bards and therefore acquired an epic flavor, which is again extremely interesting as a literary production unique of its kind of a nomadic people. One of the great English translators, a sinologist, Japanologist, a student also of Mongolian, a very famous man called Arthur Waley, who produced a short translation of the secret history. In his book, he says that these storytellers' tales that we find in the secret history are some of the most vivid primitive literature that exists anywhere in the world. So he took it as folk tales, but they are folk tales which also contain historical material that bring characters into life from history, perhaps adding legends and myths, but we are dealing with real people most of the time. So we have the historical element, we have the literary element, and we have the social and economic, cultural contents of the secret history, because the secret history is like an encyclopedia. We can find almost anything we want concerning the life of the Mongols in the 12th and 13th centuries. So, for these reasons, I felt that I could spend another 10 years of my life preparing the final version of my translation. And this I did at the end of the 1980s. And the outcome of all this work was the 2-volume translation of the secret history, which I published, which actually was published by Brill in Holland at the end of 2003, the beginning of 2004, and which contain not only the English translation of the secret history, which is very, very similar to the one that I had published before, but which also contained an extensive commentary, fully and sort of a fully annotated version of this literary masterpiece, explaining the many difficult problems that we encounter in almost every page. Problems connected with characters, with personages, with people, with the language, with terms which are difficult to understand, and so on and so forth. So this was the outcome. Now this book is already out of print, and the publishers in Holland want to produce a paperback edition of it, which almost certainly will come out in 2006. And that will make it much more easily available to people because it will not be as expensive, and I hope that we will have a much larger audience. I entirely approve of a DVD edition of The Secret History as contemplated in this project, and I support it entirely because in this way it will be made easily available to a large number of Mongols, young and old. I hope that this DVD edition will stimulate people to read the original text and to acquire perhaps the English version which I prepared, not so much also for the translation, but for the explanations that it gives to all the problems raised by The Secret History. So this is my hope, and if I were to express a wish to the Mongols in connection with this work, is that through works like The Secret History, the Altan Topçi, the Erdene Topçi, they will become more interested in their cultural and historical roots. And they will be able also to appreciate these works not only for the information that they provide us regarding famous people like Genghis Khan, but they will also be able to enjoy them for their spirit, because they contain the essence, they contain the real spirit of the beautiful Mongolian land. Thank you. Some of my, oh yes, only a few, yes. Yes, because I published about 15 books and 80 articles.
Wow.
So, yes.
Can you give us just the name of your books?
They have every 4 years they have this congress, and they have a number of vice presidents from different countries. So for many years I was representing Australasia. See? So I was sitting on the committee of the International Congress of Mongols for this period. Yes, I wrote to Moscow when I was working on that. Yes, you see, this is Mongol, the first word. This Irgen. Bauchu. Yes, Kamuk, Mongol. Ulus Un. This is Bucha Sochigai. You see the name of the place which is broken here. Yes. Yes. This is Ulus Un. Noyan. Yes, Noyan E. Bucha Sochigai. Dur. This is the name of Isunge. Yes. On to Dura Un. This is what it means at the archery context.
Okay.
Sambano.
Same. Same.
Tá.
Jetzt finalize sequence,